So with that, I'm going to turn it to Lori to give us more insight into the cyber threat landscape. Lori?
Thanks, Keith, for that introduction. And, I always start these sessions kind of giving a little bit of background on our methodology and some of the data that you're going to see in the rest of the report. So if you're joining us for the first time, thank you for joining us. And as I said, to give you a little bit of background, so you're going to see a lot of numbers and graphs today. And all of those graphs that you're going to see are based on intelligence from our cyber incident response engagements. So this is, some kind of an event where Kroll has been engaged to either respond, manage, or mitigate some type of incident on a client's network. So we look at these numbers on a monthly basis. The data that you're going to see today is based on Q3. And, as we develop a theme or a topic that we really cover in these quarterly sessions, we also look at other things. So we're looking at, the data that we're drawing from our incident response cases. We're overlaying that with what George and Ryan's team are seeing on the XDR side of things. And we're also overlaying that with what we're seeing in open source cyber threat landscape reporting during that quarter, as well as what our team, Keith and I's team, are seeing, threat actors talking about on the dark web. So that's really the basis of our report and what we're going to cover today. So if we go into the next section here, we always kind of front load with a lot of numbers. So the first thing we're going to cover is our sector analysis and threat incident types for the third quarter. And as Keith mentioned earlier, we did see a 5% increase of events impacting the professional services sector. As I mentioned before, this is from our cases. We continue to see in our casework that professional services is a top targeted sector. Our definition of business or of professional services includes things like business service firms, professional staffing firms, law firms, and real estate firms or property management companies. Of that, we typically are seeing business services and law firms kind of, take the top spot within that category for targeting of what we're seeing. We are also, we did see as well an uptick in incidents this particular quarter impacting the manufacturing sector. And although it's not on this chart, kind of tied into that, we also saw an uptick in incidents involving the construction sector as well. So I'll kind of talk a little bit about that and why we think that threat actors likely think that those are favorable targets for them. For both of those sectors, what we were seeing was be a lot of business email compromise or email compromise attacks. So one of the reasons that might be playing out with those two sectors is think of manufacturing and construction sector. Those are two kind of sectors that rely on a lot of third parties and suppliers. So you're going to have a lot of, it could be ripe for fake invoice fraud, right? Because they have a lot of vendors and suppliers that are really driving their business. Also, companies like that tend to have a large attack surface. Sometimes too, with construction, you may have people that are actually, in the field, they're not in an office, so they're in the field kind of responding to things on the fly. And there could also be a perception from threat actors that these are weaker sectors from kind of a cybersecurity sophistication perspective. And also there, from the ransomware front, if you're able to encrypt sectors like manufacturing or constructions, you may be able to halt critical operations that are now, really costing the victim network money every time that, every day goes by that those operations aren't able to function. Now you're costing them money. So there could be a strong belief from at least ransomware games that could be a sectors that would be likely to pay a ransom. Now, speaking of ransomware, when we go into our next slide here, we're going to look specifically at, some of the threat incident types that we were seeing in Q3. Now, we continue to see an uptick in email compromise. As you can see in Q3, the number jumped up about 13% from the second quarter. So we're also kind of, we have seen too, because when we look at this data, it's always like, okay, well, this is our numbers. Is this some kind of bias in our data? And that's where we really look to a lot of open source reporting to, kind of, signal to us, is this something that just we're seeing, or is there a bias there, or is this something that we're kind of seeing in the greater landscape? And reporting in Q3 has kind of, reinforced that this is something that a lot of firms are seeing, that there is this increase in email compromise. And we'll talk about that more specifically a little later, especially actors bypassing MFA methods. We have seen a lot of these business email compromise attacks targeting the financial sector as well, was something that we saw in our data. Now you can see a dip there when it comes to ransomware, but when we look at, we're reporting here on percentages. So this is like a total percentage of cases. And when we look back at case numbers through the last year and compared them to this year, we're seeing those numbers of ransomware attacks be consistent. It's just that, as I said, because there was more email compromise in our casework, that kind of brought that percentage drop, but it's not evidence that ransomware actors aren't they're still consistent, they're still attacking. We always say generally there's a small dip in Q3, sometimes maybe because of vacations that threat actors may take in certain parts of the world. And we usually see an increase in our casework in Q4. I think if you're watching any headlines now about ransomware, you're probably seeing an uptick in reporting like that. And we'll be watching when we do the Q4 report if we see that uptick again this year.